You remove sugar, the scale isn't moving. Why and what to do next? You remove sugar. 3 weeks, maybe 4. You stopped eating candy, baked goods, and sweet drinks. You did what everyone recommends doing first. And the scale just sits there. Sometimes it even ticks slightly upward. This moment, when you've done the main thing and there's no result, is one of the most demoralizing in any attempt to change body weight. There's another important context here. Removing sugar is right and necessary regardless of weight. Sugar damages blood vessels, increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, worsens skin quality, and feeds inflammation. That's why this step has value in and of itself, even if you don't see results on the scale right now. There's an important psychological point here. People who see no change on the scale often return to sugar. It doesn't help anyway. This is a mistake that nullifies even the first correct step. That's exactly why it's important not to tie yourself to the scale as the only criterion of evaluation, and to add next steps instead of undoing the ones already taken. Today, as a nutritionist, I'll explain why removing sugar is necessary but not sufficient, and why conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, is one of the most well-founded tools for working with body composition when nutrition has already been corrected, but results aren't coming. What happens to people in this situation? Removing sugar is genuinely an important step. Free sugars provoke sharp spikes in insulin, stimulate fat synthesis in the liver, and block the use of fat stores as fuel. By removing sugar, a person is doing the right thing, but this is exactly where the trap lies. The expectation that this step is enough. It isn't. There are several characteristic stories I hear in my practice. The first story. A 38-year-old woman. She removed all added sugar, stopped drinking sweet beverages, gave up baked goods. After a month, -1 kilogram. A detailed nutritional analysis revealed hidden sources: sauces, zero-sugar yogurts made with maltodextrin, bread, white rice. The glycemic index of her diet remained high despite formally giving up sugar. The second story. A 45-year-old man. He eliminated sugar strictly, checked the composition of everything. His weight stopped completely. Testing revealed chronically elevated cortisol due to work-related stress. This story highlights an important clinical principle. Without normalizing cortisol, no diet will produce sustainable results in people under chronic stress. That's why a nutritionist assessing a weight plateau always evaluates the person's level of life stress and sleep quality. These are not soft factors. They are direct determinants of fat metabolism. It was cortisol that was stimulating visceral fat synthesis and keeping weight up despite correct nutrition. The third story. A 52-year-old woman. She removed sugar and reduced calories. Weight formally dropped by 3 kilograms over 2 months. But when body composition was measured, it turned out 1.5 kilograms of muscle had been lost and 1.5 kilograms of fat. The scale showed -3, but body composition had barely improved. This story illustrates the most important principle. Under caloric deficit, without sufficient protein and resistance training, the body simultaneously loses both fat and muscle. It is precisely CLA in combination with protein that reduces the share of muscle loss, making weight reduction smarter in terms of body composition. Loss of muscle mass during caloric deficit without strength training and protein support is one of the most common mistakes. The fourth story. A 29-year-old man. He removed sugar and added exercise. His weight went slightly up. Analysis of body composition showed fat had decreased by 2 kilograms, while muscle had grown by 2.5. The scale showed a gain, but body composition had improved significantly. This person made the common mistake of evaluating results by weight rather than body composition. There's an important practical takeaway here. When starting to change body composition, it's worth agreeing with yourself from the outset. For the first 3 to 6 months, the result is not on the scale. It's on the measuring tape at the waist and in the mirror. This decision prevents premature disappointment and abandonment of a strategy that is actually already working. What do all these stories have in common? The number on the scale is a poor tool for assessing progress. Body composition is the right tool. This is exactly where CLA works most precisely. Not simply reducing weight, but changing the ratio of fat to muscle mass. An important statistic. According to body composition research, approximately 40% of people who lose weight through diet alone without resistance training lose more than 1/3 of their weight reduction from muscle tissue rather than fat. This explains why weight returns quickly after a diet. Metabolism declined along with the muscles. There's another reason why body composition matters more than weight. Muscle tissue is metabolically active. It burns energy even at rest. 1 kilogram of muscle burns approximately 12 to 15 kilocalories per day at rest. That's why body recomposition, more muscle, less fat at the same weight, significantly improves long-term basal metabolism metabolism and prevents weight regain. There's a concrete practical consequence of this. If you are doing strength training and taking CLA, don't expect rapid drops on the scale. Expect your clothes to start fitting differently, looser at the waist and more snugly at the shoulders and hips. This signal, not the number on the scale, is the true sign that body recomposition is underway. There's one more practical reference point. Every 4 weeks, take photographs in the same angle and lighting. Comparing photographs taken 3 months apart often reveals changes that are invisible in the daily mirror because the brain adapts to gradual changes in appearance. The mechanisms. Let me start with the basics. Body weight is the sum of fat tissue, muscle tissue, water, bones, and organs. When nutrition changes, each of these components can change differently and at different rates. That's why the scale can remain still while body composition genuinely improves, or drop while composition worsens. Mechanism 1. Why removing sugar isn't enough. Insulin resistance. With prolonged excess of carbohydrates and sugar, cells gradually lose sensitivity to insulin. Insulin resistance develops. In this state, insulin continues to spike in response to any carbohydrates, even from buckwheat or whole grain bread. It is this chronically elevated insulin that blocks lipolysis, the use of fat stores as fuel. Removing sugar in the context of insulin resistance is a necessary step, but insufficient to lift this block. Mechanism 2. Cortisol and stress fat. Chronic stress activates cortisol synthesis. Cortisol directly stimulates the deposition of visceral fat in the abdominal area and simultaneously increases appetite and cravings for high-calorie food. There's a concrete way to check the cortisol factor in a plateau. Measure your waist circumference. If it exceeds 80 centimeters in women or 94 centimeters in men, this is an indirect marker of excess visceral fat, often associated with chronically elevated cortisol. It is in this pattern that normalizing sleep and reducing stress are especially important. That's why under chronic stress, weight often stands still even with proper nutrition, and it is abdominal fat that responds worst of all. Mechanism 3. CLA and inhibition of lipoprotein lipase. Conjugated linoleic acid is a natural fatty acid found in dairy products and the meat of ruminant animals. The main pathway by which CLA affects fat metabolism is by blocking the enzyme lipoprotein lipase in fat cells. This enzyme is responsible for capturing fatty acids from the blood and accumulating them in adipocytes. When the activity of this enzyme decreases, fat cells receive less substrate for growth. At the same time, CLA reduces the activity of the enzyme fatty acid synthase, blocking the formation of new fats from carbohydrates in fat cells. This dual action, limiting the influx of fats into adipocytes and inhibiting their synthesis, explains the mechanism by which fat mass is reduced with CLA supplementation. An interesting fact about the natural content of CLA: dairy products and meat from grass-fed animals contain significantly more CLA than products from grain-fed animals. This is why traditional diets featuring milk and meat from pasture-raised animals were often associated with better body composition, without any specially added nutrients. Mechanism 4. CLA and activation of beta oxidation. CLA activates the nuclear receptor PPAR-alpha, a receptor that regulates the transcription of genes associated with fatty acid oxidation. Activation of PPAR-alpha increases the number and activity of mitochondria and enhances delivery of fatty acids to mitochondria for combustion. An important detail about PPAR-alpha: this receptor is activated not only by CLA, but also by physical exercise, especially aerobic. That's why combining CLA with cardio training creates a dual activation of PPAR-alpha and significantly greater enhancement of fat oxidation than either tool on its own. This is why CLA not only inhibits fat accumulation, but also intensifies its use as an energy source. There's an interesting consequence of this mechanism. People taking CLA on a background of proper nutrition and physical activity often report better endurance and less fatigue during workouts. This is precisely because improved fat oxidation provides a more stable energy substrate, without the crashes characteristic of high carbohydrate nutrition. Mechanism 5. CLA and preservation of muscle mass. When losing weight without special measures, the body loses not only fat, but also muscle tissue, especially under caloric deficit and without resistance training. CLA has an anti-catabolic effect. It reduces the breakdown of muscle protein and stimulates protein synthesis. There's an important practical meaning to this mechanism. At a caloric deficit exceeding 500 kilocalories per day, the body begins to actively break down muscle. CLA in this situation acts as insurance for muscle tissue, enabling maintenance of training intensity and high basal metabolism even with reduced caloric intake. This is what makes CLA a particularly valuable valuable tool for body recomposition, reducing fat while preserving or even slightly increasing muscle mass. There is data from clinical studies. In several randomized trials, CLA supplementation of 3 to 4 grams per day over 12 weeks resulted in a reduction of fat mass by 1 to 1.5 kilograms compared to placebo with the same diet. This effect was amplified when CLA was combined with resistance training. There's one more clinical observation. When CLA is taken without dietary changes and without physical activity, the effect is minimal. CLA works as an amplifier of a correct strategy, not a substitute for it. That's exactly why taking CLA against a background of an already corrected diet, as in the situation of I've removed sugar, is the most clinically justified use of this nutrient. Mechanism 6. Hidden carbohydrate sources and glycemic index. Removing sugar in the literal sense, candy, baked goods, beverages, does not mean reducing the glycemic load of the diet. A clear example of this difference: a bowl of white rice with no added sugar has a glycemic index of approximately 70 to 80, higher than many sweets. It is this misunderstanding of the difference between sugar removed and glycemic load reduced that leads to weight standing still despite subjectively correct eating. White bread, white rice, potatoes, juices, honey, most commercial sauces and yogurts, all of these significantly affect the insulin curve without being sugar in the everyday sense. There's a practical tool for assessing the glycemic load of a diet, a food diary with calculation of this index for each meal. A value above 100 per day represents a high load. Below 80 is moderate and conducive to reducing fat mass. It is this indicator, not simply I cut out sweets, that determines how favorable a diet is for reducing fat stores. There's one more hidden trap. Fructose, the sugar from fruit, is metabolized differently from glucose. In excess, fructose goes directly into fat synthesis in the liver without triggering an insulin response. That's why large amounts of fruit on a no-sugar diet can slow the reduction of fat mass, especially in the presence of insulin resistance. The most common mistakes. Mistake 1. Evaluating results by weight rather than body composition. The scale does not distinguish fat, muscle, and water. A 2-kilogram drop with muscle loss is a poor result. No weight change with a 2-kilogram fat loss and 2-kilogram muscle gain is an excellent result. Using bioimpedance, tape measurements, or body fat percentage as the primary indicator is the correct approach. A concrete reference point for progress. A reduction of body fat percentage by 1 to 1.5% per month is a good pace. A decrease in waist circumference of 1 centimeter per month is a visible result. These slow but real changes in body composition mean the strategy is working, even if the scale isn't moving. A motivating fact: during body recomposition, when fat is lost and muscle is gained, appearance changes significantly more than with simple weight loss. 3 kilograms of fat and 3 kilograms of muscle are completely different volumes. That's why people engaged in body recomposition often look leaner at the same weight. One more practical progress reference point. Monthly measurement of 4 dimensions: waist, hips, chest, arm. The cumulative changes in these 4 points over a quarter give an objective picture of whether body composition is changing, even when the scale is silent. Mistake 2. Assuming that removing sugar covers all necessary changes. Nutrition is a system. It is not enough to remove one component and wait for results while changing nothing else. The overall macronutrient profile, fat quality, protein quantity, meal timing, all of this affects body composition. A systemic view of nutrition, rather than the exclusion of individual foods, produces sustainable results. A practical recommendation for a systemic approach. 3 key questions for each meal. How much protein is here? What is the glycemic load? Are there beneficial fats? It is the consistent improvement of answers to these 3 questions, not the elimination of bad foods one at a time, that forms a diet that genuinely changes body composition. Mistake 3. Ignoring stress and sleep as weight factors. Chronic stress and sleep deprivation simultaneously raise cortisol and ghrelin, the hunger hormone, while lowering leptin, the satiety hormone. That's why a person eating correctly but under prolonged stress and sleeping 6 hours often cannot lose weight. Managing stress and sleeping 8 hours is as much a part of a weight loss strategy as correcting nutrition. Mistake 4. Taking CLA without physical activity. CLA works best in combination with physical exercise, especially resistance training. The mechanism? CLA enhances signaling in muscle cells, reduces catabolism of muscle protein, and improves the use of fat as fuel specifically during physical work. Without exercise, CLA's effect on body composition is significantly weaker. Mistake 5. Expecting results in 2 weeks. CLA works cumulatively. normalization of the enzymatic fat metabolism profile, changes in gene transcription via PPAR alpha, real changes in body composition. All of these are processes with time horizons of 8 to 12 weeks. Regular intake over 3 months is the minimum time frame for assessing the real effect. An important note about the form of CLA. Soft gelatin capsules with CLA in oil form provide significantly better bioavailability than powdered or tablet forms. The lipid base allows CLA to be absorbed effectively and incorporated into cell membranes, where it carries out its biological effects. Mistake 6. Replacing sugar with artificial sweeteners and considering the task solved. Aspartame, saccharin, and sucralose contain no calories, but some of them with regular use disrupt the gut microbiome and may influence the insulin response via the gut-brain axis. Reducing the overall level of sweet taste in the diet rather than replacing it with a chemical analog is the more correct long-term strategy. A practical tip: if eliminating sweetness entirely is difficult, use stevia or erythritol. These do not affect insulin and do not disrupt the microbiome the way synthetic sweeteners do. Gradually reducing the intensity of sweet taste in the diet resets taste receptors over several weeks, reducing cravings for sweets. A practical way to accelerate this adaptation? Start introducing bitter tastes into your diet. Dark chocolate of 80% cocoa or above, unsweetened coffee, bitter greens. Bitter taste reduces cravings for sweetness by acting on the same receptors. This flavor reprogramming significantly eases the transition to a diet with a low glycemic load. What actually works when weight won't move? First, measure body composition, not just weight. Bioimpedance analysis at a nutritionist's office, smart scales with this function. Tape measurements at key points. Tracking body fat percentage and measurements rather than kilograms gives an accurate picture of progress. Second, check fasting insulin and glucose. A fasting insulin test and the HOMA-IR index. With insulin resistance, standard carbohydrate reduction is often insufficient. A stricter restriction of glycemic load or medical support may be needed. A practical takeaway? A HOMA-IR above 2 to 3 already indicates insulin resistance, even if fasting glucose is normal. This early level is one of the most common reasons weight stands still despite formally correct nutrition. Concrete signs of insulin resistance that can be noticed independently. Sharp hunger 1 to 2 hours after eating. Drowsiness and sluggishness after a carbohydrate-heavy meal. Fat depositing predominantly in the abdominal area. Third, add CLA daily. See the detailed product section below. Fourth, add resistance training. Strength training reduces insulin resistance, increases muscle mass and basal metabolic rate, and maximally amplifies CLA's effect on body recomposition. 2 to 3 sessions per week at moderate intensity is a sufficient minimum. Fifth, increase protein intake. Protein reduces the glycemic load of a meal, increases satiety, and preserves muscle mass during caloric deficit. Increasing protein to 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight often triggers a change in body composition after a prolonged plateau. There's an important mechanism that explains this effect. Protein has the highest thermic effect of all macronutrients. Up to 30% of its caloric value is spent on digestion. In addition, protein provides significantly longer satiety and protects muscles during energy deficit. This makes protein the most important nutrient in any systematic effort to shift body composition toward less fat. A concrete practical step for increasing protein. Add a protein component to every meal. Eggs, fish, poultry, cottage cheese, legumes. The principle of protein at every meal is the simplest and most reproducible way to reach the necessary daily amount without counting grams every day. Sixth, normalize sleep and reduce stress. 7 to 8 hours of sleep and concrete stress management tools. Normalizing cortisol through sleep is often the missing link in a plateau that refuses to yield to dietary changes alone. A simple test for the cortisol factor. If weight stands still or rises despite correct nutrition and abdominal fat is increasing, this is a signal of a cortisol pattern. In this pattern, normalizing sleep and reducing stress should become a priority on par with dietary correction. CLA 800 milligrams. Application to the weight plateau situation. Composition: conjugated linoleic acid, soft gelatin capsule, glycerin, antioxidant. 3 specific mechanisms. First, reduction of fat deposition through lipoprotein lipase inhibition. With a corrected diet and CLA, fat cells receive less substrate for growth. This mechanism works in combination with already corrected nutrition. Without dietary correction, the effect is significantly weaker. Second, activation of fat metabolism via PPAR alpha, enhanced beta oxidation of fatty acids during physical exercise. It is the combination of CLA and resistance training training that produces the most pronounced recomposition effect. There's data on synergy. Resistance training activates receptors in muscle cells, increasing their sensitivity to anabolic signals. CLA at this moment reduces the catabolic background and provides a fat substrate for energy supply. That's why the optimal time to take CLA is before a workout or during the main meal preceding it. Third, anti-catabolic action on muscle tissue. During caloric reduction, the body tends to break down muscle. CLA reduces this process, preserving muscle mass, which maintains basal metabolism and accelerates long-term fat loss. How to take it: 2 to 3 capsules twice daily with meals. Recommended daily dose: approximately 3 grams of CLA. Course: at least 3 months. This sustained regular intake ensures a pronounced change in body composition, confirmed by clinical studies. An important safety note: CLA is a natural fatty acid found in a regular diet. At daily doses up to 4 grams, it is well tolerated and has no significant side effects. Some people experience mild gastrointestinal discomfort when taking it on an empty stomach. That's why it is recommended to take CLA with meals. Link to CLA Vitameal is in the description of this video. Weight isn't going down, not because you did something wrong, often because one step isn't enough. 3 concrete steps: measure body composition, fat and muscle, not just kilograms. Add resistance training and increase protein. Begin a 3-month course of CLA to change the enzymatic profile of fat metabolism and protect muscle mass. Removing sugar is an excellent start. CLA, exercise, and protein are the next steps. And a final thought: changing body composition is a slow process. 3 to 6 months of systematic work. There's good news for those who have already removed sugar. The hardest step, changing eating habits, you have already taken. All the remaining steps are significantly simpler to execute. That's exactly why you shouldn't give up now. You are already halfway to your result. Removing sugar is the right beginning, but the body requires a systemic approach, CLA, to change the enzymatic profile of fat metabolism, protein and resistance training to preserve muscle, normal sleep to control cortisol. It is the combination of these steps, not any single isolated one, that launches real changes in body composition. The scale may not move for months, while body composition is improving. That's exactly why focusing on the process rather than the number on the scale is the key to not quitting at the most important moment. A final practical reference point: after 3 months of systematic work, corrected diet, CLA, protein, resistance training, sleep, compare photographs and measure your dimensions. This comparison, not daily glances at the scale, will show the real picture of change. An important note on the psychology of the process: most people, seeing no results on the scale after the first month, abandon everything. It is precisely at this moment that the body is only beginning to adapt. Insulin is dropping, mitochondria are being activated, cortisol is normalizing. Quitting right then means losing accumulated progress and having to start over. And one last practical piece of advice: keep a food diary for at least the first 2 to 3 weeks. An objective written record often reveals hidden carbohydrate sources that a person doesn't notice subjectively, and explains why weight stands still despite all efforts.